on getting out anytime. So you have, it's almost the tree root system, is you start with one thing and you don't know how bad it gets. And with that, people argue is like, okay, maybe a broker lent out shares. They shouldn't have. It's their job to buy it back. That's what Trey was referring to with the failure to deliver. And that's cool. But also, you don't know how much damage was done before they bought the first shares off the market. It can just get so out of hand so rapidly. And what you're doing is increasing supply, and you end up driving the price down. Right now, it's illegal. And that's the big question of like, okay, how many of these illegal synthetic shares are actually out in the world, not just for AMC, but in the market in general?
Trey, what do you think?
So what's interesting about naked short selling is while it does increase that supply and the demand stays the same, it gets even worse. So think about this. If I had one banana and I want to sell one banana, I just sell one banana, simple as it gets, right? Because that's all that I have. Now imagine you've got competition who wants to squash your business and what you're doing basically legally, right? So they decide I have one item and I decide instead to sell 5 bananas. 4 of these don't exist and one of them does. And I've got no way of proving to you. Essentially, let's just pretend this happens over the internet, same as these transactions that happen electronically. And their goal essentially is to drown out the fair competition, the people who are playing it by the books. That's what gets really fascinating about this is the short sellers out there are betting against AMC stock. I mean, why do you think you see the financial media out here putting out pieces about, you know, how this is dumb money and you're going to lose your money. You shouldn't be here. This is gambling. They've got no reason to protect your cash. It's for them to protect their cash, right? Because they're protecting suits. That's what financial media does. It's there to protect the suits, essentially. So what the unquantifiable piece, I keep coming back to this because Matt's the data guy. I'm kind of like the hype man that likes to, you know, throw both things into it. The unquantifiable piece is how malicious some of this stuff really is. I mean, it's unquantifiable and hard to really paint the true picture on how deep this runs. I mean, AMC, I truly believe, if it wasn't for the apes, would have gone bankrupt. In January, there was a really strong thesis for a short case. I mean, they had a pretty decent cause in saying this is a shortable stock. But with each passing month, as this continues to go on and on and on, the short thesis weakens. The amount of apes out there who are fighting with AMC stock grow stronger. You grow farther in number. There's more money getting put into the stock itself. And it's just being exposed. I mean, like we already mentioned, CNBC coming out and talking about naked short selling, the illegal practice of selling things you don't own. It's malicious. That's what it comes down to. It's mind-blowing. I don't know. There's no other way to put it.
That in that CNBC video, they removed that later, but obviously it was recorded live by many, and once it's on the internet, like you say, it stays on the internet. Why do you think they would remove that? Why is it not okay to talk about on financial media?
I kind of view it akin to, they just know they're throwing gasoline on the fire. If you look at how certain things played out in late January with GameStop, it's just any recognition of it kind of like got more people involved. Like think about how many people over this weekend, because of that clip alone, had no idea what was going on with AMC and they're playing into it. It's one of these psychological wildfires. So things like that, I honestly think them even taking it off, that builds up the mystery, the intrigue. They're literally dousing this entire situation with gasoline.
Got it. What do you think about that, Trey? Why would they remove this?
I think it's them essentially realizing that they got caught pissing on the electric fence. You know, this is the problem, right? Is if we, you know, me and Matt decide to go on national news and make a claim stating, hey, there are naked shorts on the market. We can't quantifiably say who it is, how many there are. There's legality issues there, right? So for them to come out and say that, I think they realized they unboxed Pandora's box, man. I mean, there was trending on Twitter. Naked shorts was trending on Twitter. It's all people are talking about. And then that third piece, the unquantifiable, is the hype. I think going into Monday, there's going to be a lot of people excited who probably never seen AMC stock before until that got leaked, who are going to be like, all right, it's freaking game day. Let's see what actually happens here.
Wow. Now, historically, when have we seen this naked shorting have a massive impact before, or is this something that's unique? I mean, and is it solely because it's so expensive to borrow the shares, or like? So I mean, really, 3 questions here. Has this happened before, the naked shorting? And the next question would be, how do you do it, and why not just borrow it? Is it just because the costs are too high?
Matt, do you mind if I speak on this? I've actually got some really good DD that I did. I'll let you go next if that's cool.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so there was something really interesting that happened with quarantine and COVID, right? It was called the supplemental leveraging ratio. Now, this was the idea that big banks who were really suffering for a long time because of essentially people not being able to pay on their mortgages and they were losing out on a lot of capital, right? Were able to lend out more liquidity to big hedge funds, right? So what happens now is you got over leveraging from a lot of different, hedge funds and institutions out here in the market. And what they decided to do with that capital is bet that the economy would continue to suffer. They tried to target companies that they thought would not survive quarantine and COVID, such as AMC and GameStop, and they over-leveraged themselves in it. Now, if you're over-leveraged in a position and it's hard to borrow stock, how do you create that naked short, right? Well, if you can't borrow the stock, you have to find some way to short it if that's what your end goal is, and that's what they do, right? So for hard to borrow securities like GameStop, which was the original, Wall Street bets, the Reddit frenzy, the foundation to where we are right now, they couldn't borrow any stock, so they naked shorted it. And that's essentially what the whole origin of this is to me. And maybe some of this is speculation, but these are things that have happened, right? Supplemental leveraging ratio did happen, and it created this huge amounts of liquidity that got pumped out in the market short. short. I mean, you look at the last 9 months or so, the amount of shorting that's taken place is historic in terms of what you've actually seen in years past. So it's very unusual because AMC is just one of them. I mean, you look at Microvision, Express, Cost, Bed Bath & Beyond, GameStop still to this day. I think Root is one that people are starting to talk about. It's everywhere. Everywhere you've got insane shorting, and we can only assume along with that naked shorting with hard to borrow securities that is taking place.
So the SLR you touched on, the supplemental leverage ratio, this was you think this was a way that sort of spawned this naked shorting? Maybe can you clarify on that a little bit more, because this was something that was imputed by the Federal Reserve and to make sure that banks had enough liquidity. Do you think that basically just removed money from the market and therefore led to this naked shorting? Or maybe I missed the connection there a little bit.
Yeah, so this SLR, the supplemental leveraging ratio, essentially, it allowed these big banks who are suffering massive losses in liquidity, right, to make back amounts of money by lending out, capital from first the Federal Reserve out to banks, and then banks out to hedge funds who decide to borrow liquidity from these big banks. And you've got this huge amount of liquidity that should not be in the market because it's essentially borrowing coming from borrowing that went into the stock market to short different securities.
I see. Okay. Yeah, because that's something that's pretty common that happens, especially among institutions, and it's really a lot of what happened in 2008 on sort of broad scale as well. As it's really betting on top of betting, right? I mean, it's making a bet, let's say, against mortgage-backed securities, and then getting a credit default swap on top of that, and collateralized debt obligations, and all these incredibly complicated financial instruments. And so what you're saying is really, maybe it doesn't even matter what we call it. We just know that enough of the institutions are making enough bets with whatever crazy instruments they have against this, and the more the price goes up, the more all those contracts they have fall apart, and that's the bottom line.
Absolutely. So think about this. If there's a short position out there and you've got infinite downside for loss, or you can lose an infinite amount of money, they establish their short positions, because the short interest has been anywhere between 15 and 20%, sometimes even higher than that, for months now. Literally since, I would argue, probably March. What do you think, man, about March? About that time frame? So since March, back then, the stock was trading between $9 and $15. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt, right? We'll say they're $15 cost average for the majority of these short positions. Maybe some have covered, maybe some have established new positions. If you had an average cost of $15 in your short position and you're trading at 47 right now, you're down a substantial amount of money. And where does that come from? How are they going to pay that back? I mean, the leveraging here is what's incredibly scary about AMC stock, and how bad this could get for the hedge funds, and why some people are so bullish on AMC is because you can't quantify how much money is going to have to go into this stock to get everybody out of their essentially negative short position.
Yeah, that's incredible. And now, is this something that is going to be ubiquitous? Are we going to see this just regularly happen to different companies? And really, what is the next step? I mean, so AMC's got a bunch of contracts of people betting against it. It's hard to quantify. In theory, they could continue to throw money on their contracts in perpetuity as long as they have more money. And it becomes this tug of war of who can last longer, right? But at some point, it's not going to be AMC anymore. So how does that transition work? Like, where do people go from here? Is the rocket ship still coming? And then when does everybody kind of get off? And then does it all go into another stock, or do we get a little bit of what we had after GameStop, where you had this